Good evening, and welcome to the place where we talk all things Washington Commanders. That's right, this is the Commanders Gridiron, and I'm your host, Steve, as we will go through all the happenings over the last week on and off the field with the Washington Commanders. And as we touch on week to week, as we've been doing this for a little over a month now, there is no short of storylines, drama, issues, fan interaction with Washington Commanders and their fan base, and it is now. I'm starting off this week. Don't you know, the day after last week's episode, the first subject that we're going to talk about tonight pops up into the news and hits the wildfire of the DC area, and that is the name change, right? So, one of the things that we kind of knew or was alluded to once the new ownership group took over in July was whether the big question was going to be whether or not there was going to be a name change, whether or not there was going to be another rebrand of the Washington team for the third, actually technically the fourth time in the last 4 years. And Josh Harris and minority owners did nothing to soothe or alleviate the rampant notion that there would be a name change or a rebrand. So what that did in return was it sparked wildfire among the Washington Redskins faithful to bring back the name, to bring back the logo, to bring back the moniker, to bring back the true colors, of which last year's uniforms, when they came out with the Commanders, were slightly askew from the burgundy and gold as we come to know over the last 20 some 30 years under the old brand. So one of the things that gained a lot of steam over the last month, especially led by a group of the Native American Guild Association, I think it was NAGA, was an online petition to get the name the Washington Redskins back as the official name of the Washington football team here in the DC area. So that petition, as of last week, when we were doing our show last Tuesday night, had about 120,000 signatures, I think it was, and it was gaining some steam for the name change. Let's be honest, let's call it as it is. All you saw on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on radio shows in the DC area, and even sports segments on DC TV was about petitions and possible name changes. Well, on Wednesday morning, Jason Wright, president of the Washington Commanders, came out and basically came out on 106.7 The Fan, a local DC sports station, that the ownership group, Josh Harris and a company from DC, was in fact thinking about rebranding and a name change. However, the biggest point that he was there to make was the fact that the Washington Redskins name and moniker was off the table as an option. And you would think that people just absolutely lost their minds to the fact that, it just the comments, the replies, the tweets, the Facebook posts, and everything was just borderline absurd and racist, right? And as Stacy says, hey, they should just go back to being the Redskins, screw the crybabies. While I would agree with that on about 50% of me, the other 50% of me sees the practicality of why they're not going back to the Washington Redskins. So real quick recap, right? Back about 3 to 4 years ago, there's a lot of pressure, not only from the NFL, but more so from business partnerships, corporations, and of course, being in the biggest political climate area of our country in DC, the politics of it, of being involved with the name change. So while Dan Snyder was adamant year after year, look, I am not changing the name. I'm not changing the name. Screw the NFL. Screw everybody else. When it came down to corporate sponsorships pulling millions and billions of dollars, the threat of it away from FedEx Field and the Washington Redskins, basically Snyder had to, you know, basically do what he said he wasn't going to do, and that was change the name. So, of course, in the intern, then we had the intern branding, Washington football team. And then, of course, he came up with the half assed, you know, rebrand, if you want to call it that, of what we now have as Washington Commanders. Real quick, I'm going to give a shout out to my buddy Paul. Hey, man, what's up? Nice to hear from you. We definitely have a fill-in producer for me tonight. Paul's out on a little medical leave, but I'm looking forward to having you back in the saddle with me next Tuesday. Hope you feel well, get better. Everybody's thinking about you. So as we get back to the rebrand, one of the things that, people were looking at, hey, let's go back to the Redskins. Let's go back to the Redskins. The problem with that was there's only 125,000 people that signed this petition so far. And then the question is, well, how many of them are really fans? How many of them are football fans? How many people aren't football fans and just saw the petition online and said, I'll sign it, whatever. And like I said, the kickback from the fan base of, and I won't say the fan base of the Commanders, but the fan base of that group of people that are so diehard on bringing back the Redskins name was unreal. Even to the point that, kind of as we love and know him, Brian Mitchell, who's basically arguably one of the should be in the Hall of Fame for running back and return specialist in the NFL. Played the majority of his career here in D.C. as well as some years up the road in Philadelphia. Has his own radio show in midday, 1067 The Fan, where Jason Wright actually came on to make that statement. And B. Mitch, as everybody calls him locally, kind of went on a little rant to address the issue of the name change petition. But more so, not just the name change petition, but the reaction to Jason Wright, the current team president, who, let's call it as it is, happens to be black. B. Mitch is black, played, his entire career in the NFL, between Washington and Philadelphia, and made some serious observations from the people that were in favor of the name change back to the Redskins as a result of Jason Wright making that announcement. And some of the things that B. Mitch said, were really on point. And he said, some of you are as ignorant as they come. Jason Wright spoke based off of what he's been told by ownership. It wasn't him. It wasn't Jason Wright that made the decision single-handedly. Look, we're not entertaining the idea of going to the Washington Redskins. That was a statement that he basically carried from Josh Harris, from Magic Johnson, Mitchell Rales, Mike Ine, all those guys, right? So, it's basically ownership told him that, not him. And a lot of you people showed your true colors on social media. We're not going to sit here and act like racism doesn't live anymore. I saw nothing but that on the comments, especially the ones toward Jason Wright, team president. Let's stop thinking it was Jason's right mindset to change it. The NFL was involved. Corporations were involved. Partnerships were involved. This morning, you say no one cared about this ever. I rolled into town in 1990, a young man who didn't grow up in D.C. and didn't know what was going on, and I was asked a bunch of hard questions. So it's always been that topic. There's a petition going around, about 120, 130,000 names at the time last week. You know what the last petition had? Well, the last petition he was referring to was the name change to get rid of the Washington Redskins. That petition had over 1 million people signing that petition to get rid of the name. Doesn't that tell you there are a lot of people that don't think like you? So therefore, basically it goes back to B. Mitch saying, hey, look, don't shoot the messenger and Jason Wright just because he delivered that message from team ownership that, hey, look, we're considering a rebrand. We're not going to do the Washington Redskins. We're probably going to come up with something else. Does that bring the Washington Red Wolves back into play? Does it bring something goofy like the Monuments or the Admirals or whatever else, back into play, or the goofy list that they had when they had like 8 to 10 possibility names for name changes? Are they going to truly do a fan base survey to see, who is what the fans want? Last time around, that came through as you know, basically, like, I think the Red Wolves were at the top, and Snyder went completely different direction, which was strictly, hey, let's call it as it is, Dan Snyder being Dan Snyder, right? So it'll be interesting to see what happens. What this does do, thankfully for me as a host, it allows me to talk more about football in the coming weeks and less about a rebrand. Because I don't think you're honestly going to see anything to deal with a rebrand until at least second half of the season, or even after the season, once the season's over in January, February. Excuse me. Because, they can sign the agreement with the NFL that it will be, they can do a rebrand, but it's going to be a 1 to 2 year process. So even if they do a rebrand, you're not going to see a rebrand in 2024. You may or may not see the rebrand in the beginning of the 25 season, which I think realistically is probably the earliest that you're going to see that done. As Adam says, he thinks it's going to be called the Washington Red Tails. Red Tails was another name that gained popularity back when they were doing the proposed list of names: Red Wolves, Red Tails. They wanted to kind of carry the red into it without being red skinned, right? So we'll see what happens with the name change, name brand, but there's always going to be a headline that's popping up. One of the other things that popped up last Wednesday, last Thursday, going into the middle of the end of the week, was the fact that Josh Harris and managing partners came out and said, hey, folks, fans, spectators, guests of other teams, since, a lot of times we're outnumbered, where our home games look like away games, really, came out and said, hey, look, here's the deal. We are going to pump $40 million into FedEx Field. And people went nuts. What I mean by nuts: social media, radio shows, TV shows, national news, national sports, the whole 9 yards. Why is that significant? Doesn't sound like a whole lot of money. And in the grand scheme of things, it's probably not, right? But one of the things that they're going to do is, it's all about perception. Josh Harris and his group are doing the things that they need to do to start winning the fan overs and getting the fans back in attendance to FedEx Field. FedEx Field has been notoriously horrible as a sports venue for the last 5+ years, maybe right around 5 at least. We all know the poop incident last year. We all know, traffic nightmares. Stuff doesn't work at FedEx Field. Not really a game day experience at FedEx Field. Alumni not wanting to come back because of the animosity between Dan Snyder and a lot of the legendary former players, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on. And here we are. Josh Harris comes out. First thing he does is he improves training camp and greatly improves the training camp experience. It's the biggest training camp attendance that they've had in probably 2 decades. They had stands. They had game day experience. It was kind of like being at a game, but not at a game, right? So then he backs that up, doubles down, and says, hey, look, ownership group's going to drop $40 million into it. So what are you going to get for $40 million, right? That's kind of the big question. So what they came out with and said was that basically the Washington Commanders announced a $40 million investment into FedEx Field, which will produce significant upgrades to stadium infrastructure and the overall fan experiences, which is basically the 2 big things that they were looking for. And these upgrades include a bunch of themed suites, which will kind of be cool if you can afford them. I know they're pretty salty. I looked into getting one last season, and I think the cheapest price of the cheapest game started at $11 grand just for one game. Kind of crazy, but there's people out there that do that, right? They're going to have new ticket scanning pedestals, point of sale upgrades, updated Commanders branding imagery around the stadium, signs, the whole 9 yards. Maintenance repairs to the bowl and paint around the stadium. Hey, man, what better way to make your stadium look better than slap a coat of paint on everything? New TVs, new soundboards, new sound systems, and everything else. Quick shout out to Eileen. Hi. Hey, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in tonight. So, as Trissa Langston, she was the Senior Vice President of Operations and the Guest Experience at FedEx Field, and the Washington Commanders said that we have the best fans in football, and they deserve the best game day experience. These upgrades to FedEx Field represent an immediate and tangible step to improve that experience, something our ownership considers a top priority. And they've shown that by doing that right off the bat. They've literally owned the team for 2.5 months, and already we've seen upgrade here, upgrade there, everything else. So it's kind of just pointing to fruition of what the expectations are from the ownership, where they want to put their dollars in. They just spent $6 billion to buy the team, and right off the bat, we're already starting the new stadium process to figure out where we're going to go, what we're going to do. And oh, by the way, we're not going to let FedEx Field rot for the next 5 years until we get a stadium. We're going to start fixing that and dropping some money into FedEx Field. So not only are we taking care of our fans, we're also taking care of our house. Fans will continue to see improvements throughout the season as we continue to invest and make changes to everything from basic infrastructure to a reimagined pregame ritual. So one of the cool things is, we've talked about how bad the game day fan experience has been for years. With the new ownership group, we've already seen a lot of legendary past Hall of Famers and key players coming back into the fold, whether they're doing appearances at training camp, whether they're doing appearances at, season ticket promotion events, out and about with partnership activities, whatever. But, it shows another commitment from ownership that they're trying to do what they can to win the fans back. And this is basically highlighted by the notion that they're encouraging, fans to show up 3 hours early when the gates open to the stadium, take that stroll around the stadium exterior and around the concourse. There's Legends Plaza, there's live music, there's tailgate games, there's team partner activities, corporate team partner activities. The Washington Legends are coming back in the command center, the game day live show, the Bud Light end zone where you can watch pregame warm-ups as well. There's always food, there's drinks, there's discounted beer this year, the whole 9 yards. So it'll be really interesting to see how that game day fan experience kind of gets reimagined post Dan Snyder era, right? So we'll see what happens and kind of go from there. But I think it's all things that are positive, right? And people realize that because, whether you say, hey, it's because we finally got rid of Dan Snyder, hey, it's because we got new ownership in Josh Harris and his partners, whatever the reasons are, about a week ago, maybe, I think it was right around maybe last week's episode or a day or two afterwards, the team and the NFL announced that, hey, week 1 is sold out legitimately sold out for the Arizona Cardinals game. And in all honesty, that hasn't been seen or heard of under the Snyder era for, you could say, quite some time, realistically. They would always claim that the games are sold out. But I can tell you, being a former season ticket holder up until the end of last season, so, I've been a season ticket holder for 5 years, from 17 to 22, and they would claim sold out games. But I can tell you, rest assured, going to the games that I went to, games were not sold out. Suites were not sold out. They still had the covered sections up in the 400s. Excuse me, you still look around the 300s and you see empty seats. You still look around the bowls down on the field level in the 100s, 200s. You still saw empty seats. So it'll be really amazing to see the fans, to see not only our fans, but the fans that do travel for Arizona, and as well as, all the activity in the parking lots and the tailgate activity beforehand and even after the game. To see all those people coming back into DC with that renewed energy and excitement for our team that we haven't seen in so many years under the Dan Snyder era. So it'll definitely be interesting to watch, something to behold and take part of, and in its simplicity, something to be excited about, right? Which kind of leads us into the bulk of our discussion tonight, and that's going to be, basically the season preview. I was kind of putting it off throughout the duration of training camp, because you want to see how the team evolves in the preseason, and for us in particular, how Sam Howell's going to do in the preseason. Is Sam Howell going to look as good as he should in the preseason to be our starting quarterback in QB1 going into week one? Who's going to make the final cut to make the 53-man roster? Who's going to be hurt going into week one? Unfortunately, we have two key players in wide receiver Terry McLaurin and defensive end Chase Young, who might not even be playing in week one. But we're playing Arizona, so is that a concern? Is it a bigger deal than what it needs to be? Is it, something that for each guy, it kind of comes down to particulars, right? Obviously, one plays offense, one plays defense. One's in a contract year, didn't have his 5th year option renewed by the head coach and the general manager. Hey, look, you're going to have to play and ball out to get your long-term deal. The other guy is the established fan favorite, the team captain, the face of the franchise. So, and they're both battling different injuries. So with that being said, can we afford to not have one play more than the other for week one? Part of me says yes, right? Like, looking at the team we're playing in week one in Arizona, I can afford to not have Terry, as much as I want Terry McLaurin on that field for the first game, home opener, sold out, in front of 80-some thousand fans. I want Terry McLaurin there. I want him to score that touchdown. I'm okay if Terry McLaurin isn't ready for week one. Chase Young, on the other hand, that dude needs to be there. That dude needs to be on the field as much as he is. It was the alleged neck stinger in the first preseason game against Cleveland, I think it was. And he's been out ever since. Up until yesterday, he wasn't even cleared by the doctor for full team contact. So is it really a neck stinger? Is there a lot more to it than what, kind of meets the eye? We know from the past that Coach Rivera, who basically does the injury reports and updates on a weekly basis with the Washington media, is very conservative and reserved in how he addresses team injuries and player injuries. We know that from last year with the Curtis Samuel debacle, as well as, Logan Thomas, Chase Young, last year when Chase Young was going through his ACL problems and rehab as well. So there could be a lot more to it, and coaching staff and management just isn't leading that on. But before we get into the full season preview, we kind of got to look at 2022 and how we got to 2023, right? Because I feel that, when we look at last year and what we did, it kind of helps us predict and see where we might go this season. So real quick, last season, the Commanders finished with a record of 8-1. They were 4-5 at home, almost 500, and 4-3-1 on the road. That one is going to be kind of reiterated a couple of times throughout the show tonight as we look at the upcoming schedule and kind of who we play and when and yada, yada, yada. So as everybody knows, the Washington Commanders play in arguably the hardest division in the NFL, in the NFC East. Even for finishing 4th, dead last in the division last year, we still have like the 8th or 9th hardest schedule, I think it is, basically top half of the NFL this year, which is kind of unheard of, right? Because when you finish last in your division of the 8 divisions in the NFL, you're kind of supposed to have the easier schedules, which isn't necessarily true when A, you play in the hardest division in the NFL, arguably one of the hardest divisions in the NFL. B, you're playing your division rotational models against the AFC East, the NFC West, and your 3 extra games aren't cupcakes either. So, so that kind of has a mix for a pretty dynamic season, or what could end up being a pretty dynamic season as well. Third, the teams that you thought were going to be shitty last year, that you kind of thought might carry that into 2023, actually made some significant changes, whether it's coaching staff, whether it's key players, key additions, key free agents, trades, whatever, to make themselves better or significantly better in the off season that aren't that necessarily easy W anymore. The one that comes to mind right off the top of my head that we'll address here in a little bit is the New York Jets, right? We look at the Jets last year and we're like, man, like going into this season, we could probably beat the Jets. I'm not going to say it's a given. It's not an easy win, but it's somebody that if we play to our potential, we could beat the Jets. And then they go out and load up in the off season, and now you're scratching your head and you're like, well, man, like, ooh, like we might not be able to get a W against the Jets. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So one of the things that I alluded to a couple minutes ago in the NFC East, it's arguably one of the hardest divisions in football. And our record showed that last year because we went 2-3-1 in the division against the Cowboys, the Eagles, and the Giants. Now, I'd like to think that on any given year, we can basically go 3-3, which basically splits your games against the division, right? It'd be awesome if I could say, hey, look, we could sweep the entire division and go 6-0, or even lose one and go 5-1, but that's not realistic. We got some pretty stellar teams in the NFC East. So I kind of always base my schedule prediction on the fact that we can at least do one out of the two games, whether it's on the road or at home, against the interdivision games, interdivision teams, that we can split that and go 500. So I'd like to say that we go 3-3 instead of 2-3-1 against last year. So then we're like, okay, well, what was our record against the NFC East division last year? Starting with the Cowboys, we were 1-1. Obviously, 500, right? Point differential of +5. Not too shabby, not too bad. Philadelphia Eagles, we went 1-1. Hey, man, for a team that went to the Super Bowl last year and we beat them once and didn't get swept, that's pretty awesome. One of the crazy note to that, and we'll probably make note of it again, only because it's like our own little feather in the hat that we have against the Eagles, who's super loaded, was our win came at Lincoln Financial last year when they were undefeated. And, we knocked them off. Couldn't beat them at home, but, it's something that we can kind of build off of for this year. Point differential in that one was -5 between the two games with the Eagles. And as Paul says, it's a juggernaut of the schedule, right? Got the Jets, the Broncos, the Falcons, the Bears, the Seahawks, and then plus the NFC East. And he says, wow, and he's absolutely right. It's a stacked schedule. And not to take anything away from my other fellow NFC East, counterparts, like they have just as hard of schedules as we do too. So it'll be definitely interesting to see how, as they say, how everything falls at the end of the game and where the scores are with the W's. So, last year against the New York Giants, that's kind of one where I thought obviously we should have, went 1-1, probably even 2-0. But we went 1-1. We tied them bastards. We had the second game that had absolutely horrendous refereeing in it that actually cost us a spot in the playoffs by the non-pass interference call that was not called. That had that been called and the game went the way it did, we would have won. And consequently, you could have seen for the first time in NFL history all four teams from a particular division make it into the playoffs. Would have been completely crazy and pandemonium and anarchy, but that's the way it is in the NFC East because those four teams would have been just that good. Point differential last year with the Giants was -8. So, you can kind of see that just in the division, we were at a -8 in the division as well. And, as the Big Blue Power Hour chimes in, yep, we got the AFC East as well, which is super stacked as we go through the schedule. And depending on how Mac Jones does with Bill O'Brien now, and he has a true offensive coordinator and not a special teams coach and a defensive coordinator kind of co-coordinating on offense, the Patriots aren't going to be too shabby either. So, when you throw in the fact that you're playing 4 games against the Jets, the Bills, the Dolphins, and the Patriots, man, that makes everything even worse. So, obviously, based off the schedule from last year, the Commanders did not make the playoffs in our wild card spot for 2022. And some other kind of notes, just some quick key notes for the 2022 seasons, which is kind of interesting that in close one-score games, basically 7 points or less, the Commanders went 5-3-1. So in those games where a lot of times we didn't score very many points. I think our average was somewhere between 17 to 20. That, we did fairly well in those games. We went 5-3-1 when the point differential or the point total was less than 7. Basically, in games decided by a field goal or less, we went 2-1-1. Hence the tie with the New York Giants. One of the things that we kind of look at as a building block is how well did you do in overtime from the season before, the previous season. And when I looked at this stat, I had to scratch my head, and I'm like, man, we didn't do any. Washington Commanders didn't go to overtime at all in 2022. I had to shake my head at that, and I was like, did we really? So I even pulled up the schedule, last year's results, kind of looked at it, and, we tied the New York Giants, but we didn't play any overtime games in the regular season. So, other than our ties. So it was kind of really interesting that we did that. We had a couple win streaks. Longest was being 3 games last year. Longest losing streak was 4. So, it kind of showed some resiliency that, we were able to bounce back from the losing streak, pick up that victory, kind of go in and build on it. Hey, we're going to win 3 and kind of go from there. But, who knows? So we'll see what happens. So real quick, we're going to take a break, talk about our sponsors. First sponsor of the night is Monkey Culp Coffee, with 3 new brands of Sumatran Blend, the Toasted Almond, and the Bourbon Chocolate Chip. Use promo code OOTBS Sports for your discount at Monkey Culp Coffee. Use the promo code OOTB Sports for Monkey Culp Coffee. Get those new 3 flavors while you can. Next one is 1-800-HURT-123. That's attorney Big Al. Jason Fine, a.k.a. attorney Big Al. For all your legal needs, he has 3 office locations throughout Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Those include Philadelphia, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, PA. If you need anything legal, give a call to Jason Fine, attorney Big Al, at 1-800-HURT-123. And last but not least, Dugout Mugs. Great little product. They're actually customized baseball bats that are cut off, hollowed out. Put an ice cold beverage in there and enjoy them on a sunny, hot day like we're currently experiencing this week. But you can use promo code OOTB Sports 20 at dugoutmugs.com for your discount on those products. I know they also make the baseball bats in shot glass form as well. So once again, use that promo code OOTB Sports 20 at the dugoutmugs.com to get your discount on those products as well. All right, jumping back into the discussion for the second half of the show. Let's take a look. Now that we recapped where we were in 2022, let's look and see how we might do in 2023. So one of the things that, kind of jumps out at us is how the team's going to do going into 2023 with the changes that we made, right? We kind of know what we're getting in Sam Howell. We know what we're getting in EB, Eric Bieniemy, the new offensive coordinator. We know what we're getting in Jack Del Rio's defense. Hopefully they start faster and more consistent than what they do on an annual basis. But we got to see what's going to happen, and we're going to break that down as we go week through week through the 17-game schedule. So, as we kind of alluded to earlier, there's going to be a lot of hype. There's going to be a lot of excitement. The fan base is going to be engaged. There's a lot of people, looking to see what's going to happen with the new Josh Harris era. And that starts on September 10th, week 1, versus the Arizona Cardinals. So one of the things that, we're going to look at with the Arizona Cardinals, and probably the biggest headline going into that game, and is quarterback. And it's kind of interesting because it's by far the most winnable game for the Washington Commanders, which unfortunately is week 1. So, okay, it's good because we should win on paper, and we should win on the field, and it'll start us off on the right foot going into the season, of which is only going to get harder from there. But Arizona's new regime is tearing it down out there in Arizona, and you could say they're in a rebrand, you could say they're in a rebuild, you could say they're in a culture change. They fired a head coach, they fired a GM last year, so now we're coming in with and they're trading away key pieces. They cut quarterback Colt McCoy, who was basically the most experienced quarterback on the roster after Kyler Murray, who I honestly thought was going to be the Week 1 starter facing us, as he played for Washington for 3 or 4 years before he went to Arizona, and he was the presumed starter without Kyler Murray being gone for his ACL rehab. The Cardinals have a new head coach, first-time offensive coordinator, and probably will start journeyman quarterback Josh Dobbs. As Paul says, Week 1 versus the Cardinals, his prediction is 26-17, but don't count out Dobbs. You need to get pressure on him. I agree. Dobbs isn't a shabby quarterback in his own right. However, one of the things that kind of makes this a little bit better is Arizona just traded for Dobbs on August 24th. So it's not like Dobbs has been in the system for most of training camp or OTAs or even like post-draft, and they went out and picked him up. He was literally signed like 2 weeks ago. So it'll be interesting to see how Washington does against this. I still think, they're going to be heavily favored. Washington's favored at this point in time. Washington favored by about 8 points on the spread for you gambling folks, according to most gambling sites. And that was before they cut Colt McCoy 3 days ago. I haven't had a chance to see where the line's at right now, but it should be a favorite, maybe even in a steeper fashion. And, as long as we can work to contain Dobbs, I think we're going to be fine. Our secondary is going to be good to go. Interior line is going to be good to go. Our linebacking group, maybe. We'll see how they do Week 1 against an average to below average team. Maybe that's what they need to prepare in order to make that jump as we go. So, let's call it as it is. I kind of see, Week 1 being the W, right? So don't know what the score is going to be. I'm hoping we can score more than our average of 20 points. I feel we're going to be able to put up about 24-28. In Sam Howell, we believe Week 1 is going to be getting us the W. Week 2, we turn around and go right back out to Mile High City, facing the Denver Broncos. Now, normally, kind of goes back to what we said at the very beginning of the show, is that, looking before the offseason when they released the NFL schedule for the following year, you would absolutely look at chalking up the W against the Denver Broncos for 2023. However, after a disastrous first year, Denver's new ownership group hired Coach Sean Payton to resurrect Russell Wilson's career. And if the duo are successful, a big question after an uneven preseason. They didn't do that well in the preseason. Denver could be a problem. The offense is getting explosive. Running back Javonte Williams, back from his, I think it was torn ACL, had some kind of a big knee injury last year. But they could be without Jerry Jeudy and a couple other guys in Week 1. So it might balance itself out, right? So the big 2 question marks, X factors for Week 2 is going to be, 1, what's Sean Payton going to be like in 2023? Is Sean Payton going to be the one of the Super Bowl year when the New Orleans Saints won with Drew Brees and company and went to the Super Bowl, grabbed the Lombardi Trophy for the city, and all was well? But we're going to get the one that kind of gives 500-ish football for the team, still trying to figure out his way through, assembling the group, getting the most out of them, etc. The second X factor is going to be, what are we going to get out of Russell Wilson? It is going to only be Week 2, which will be good for us because, he's only had the off-season training camp and Week 1 basically to put everything together. We're not facing them later in the year where everything could be gelling. So are we going to get the Russell Wilson from the Seattle days where he excelled, super mobile quarterback running and gunning and slinging? Or are we going to get the Russell Wilson from last year who basically was a complete disaster? I'd like to think we're still going to get some of the majority of a Russell Wilson that we saw last year. Now, the game is home in Denver. Might be a little more comfortable for him as opposed to him playing on the road. But I got to agree with Paul. I think week 2, we're going to get the dub against the Broncos. So we're going to start the season out 2-0. The problem is that's where it's going to be short-lived, right? Because in week 3, that's where we take on the first of the AFC East opponents in the Buffalo Bills. Now, one of the things that's going to make this game kind of at least somewhat decent in our favor is this game's at FedEx Field, 1 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon on CBS. So, which is kind of going to alluded to later on as we go through the schedule, but we only have one primetime game in 2023, which is a rematch from 2022. So, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks here coming up. So we all know what the Buffalo Bills brings to the table, right? The Buffalo Bills are they're the juggernaut Super Bowl contenders on an annual basis with MVP caliber quarterback in Josh Allen, who played, I think, at Wyoming, right? Runner, gunslinger, great arm, mobile. We should be better than the last time we played him, which was 2 years, actually, I guess 3 years ago now, in 2021, where we got blown out 43-21. And that was at Buffalo. But there seems to be a simmering discord between Josh Allen and star wide receiver Stephon Diggs. Now, Josh Allen went on the Pat McAfee show last week, and I actually listened to the podcast. I usually listen to Pat McAfee the day after while I'm going to work at dark 30 or coming home from work. And I listened to his interview or his segment with Pat McAfee, and that was actually a direct question that was asked to Josh Allen. Was, hey, man, what's the relationship like between you and Stephon Diggs? And Allen will play it off like, everything's good. Nothing happened. It's, everything's kosher. We're best buds, yada, yada, yada. But you got to think that, look, let's be honest. These are grown men that, when stuff happens and there's a rift between two guys or two guys and coaching staff management, that stuff doesn't go away easily. It might go away eventually, but it doesn't happen overnight. So it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic works. So Washington defense, needs to start a lot faster than it has in the past to make this game somewhat close and maybe even make it a season to beat. But, unfortunately, I think against the Buffalo Bills, even though it's at home, we're getting the L. I just see Buffalo being too powerful, too explosive, and one of the problems that we're going to have this year, unless they can prove me wrong, is mobile quarterbacks. So I got to agree with Paul. I think we're getting the loss in week 3 against the Bills. So that puts us down to 2-1. Week 4, here we come, right? So the first of our NFC East divisional opponents. We go to Lincoln Financial Field on August 4th. I'm going to make a shameless plug. September 27th, I'm actually going to be on talking pregame, discussions and previews on the Philly Press Box with my buddy Bill Furman, September 27th. So you can catch me on there with those awesome guys talking about the upcoming Commanders Philly game for week 4, October 1st. But back to this game, maybe the best win of Ron Rivera's coaching tenure here in D.C. came last year at Lincoln Financial Field. The key word or the key phrase at Lincoln Financial Field last year. We knocked off the undefeated Eagles 32-21 on Monday Night Football. First, it was a primetime win for the Commanders. That's kind of the big thing, right? 2, we beat the Eagles on Monday Night Football, primetime game, who were undefeated. And not only did we beat them, but we scored 32 points, which was, for us last year, 32 points was absurd. So one of the bad parts, though, is it'll be difficult to pull off that upset again since the Eagles reloaded in the offseason this year, and hoping for another Super Bowl run since they got to the Super Bowl game last year. So Philadelphia addressed the weaknesses, as I'll dub, that the Washington exploited last year in that game, and that was the interior defensive line. One of the things that allowed us to manhandle the Eagles to get those 32 points was by just picking apart that interior defensive line. And, how did the Eagles address that? Well, they picked up arguably the best guy in the college football draft in Georgia defensive tackle Jalen Carter. So by picking him up along with a couple other guys, it'll be interesting to see how the Eagles, are going to do this year. And speaking of the Eagles, as we look and see, before I give my official pick per se for this game, the Eagles, even though they lost some guys, they lost Andre Dillard, TJ Edwards, Marcus Epps. We lost, Gardner Johnson, Gardner Minshew, Pascal, Miles Sanders, who went to Carolina, and a couple other guys. They picked up some studs as well. Let's not be, let's call it as it is. They picked up safety Terrell Edmonds, Justin Evans, a backup quarterback for Jalen Hurts and Marcus Mariota, who didn't necessarily have a good preseason, but typically up until he had his knee surgery last year, he's a decent backup quarterback. They got Rashard Penny, Kentavious Street, Greedy Williams, and they got Swift from Detroit as well. So it'll be interesting to see how these guys play into the Eagles. Basically, that first Eagles game against Week 4. But, unfortunately, I just don't see us matching that firepower that the Eagles are going to bring. The Eagles do have a new offensive coordinator. The Eagles do have a new defensive coordinator. But this is seriously going to be a game won in the trenches. And unfortunately, I just see the Eagles being too much for the Washington Commanders, bringing us to a Week 4 loss, which brings us to 2-2. So, exactly, you get to the second level, their linebackers and secondary, they're exploitable. So hopefully we can. We got a good wide receiving core. It'll be interesting to see how our tight ends match up with that, how they can do with that. And I think it'll be a good game, but it's still going to ultimately result in a loss. So our only primetime game of the season in the rematch that I just hit on a couple minutes ago is Week 5 versus the Chicago Bears. Last year we played, I don't think it's Soldier Field anymore. Maybe it is Soldier Field. We were in Chicago last year for a Thursday night primetime game. And I guess for whatever reason, Amazon loved that game so much that they're going to be like, hey, NFL, we want that game again between the Washington Commanders and the Chicago Bears. So I guess Amazon can't get enough of this Commanders-Bears series, right, for whatever reason. So for the second straight years, the teams are going to play on Thursday night on Amazon Prime. This time, it's in Washington at FedEx Field. Chicago is in the second year of a rebuild. We know that, and should be better on defense since they added linebacker Tremaine Edmonds, who came from Buffalo over to Chicago. The regime is betting on big continued development from dynamic quarterback Justin Fields. Once again, probably going to be our nemesis of mobile quarterbacks, right? Who's a devastating threat on his legs, but they also picked up DJ Moore, wide receiver from Carolina, to be his new number one wide receiver. So, that combination, along with some of the other guys that he had from last year, could pose a threat to Washington. We don't typically do well on Monday nights. We typically do better on Thursday nights than we do on Monday nights. And, with it being at home, being our only primetime home game, hopefully our offense is gelling by then under EB. Defense is in full swing by Week 5. That gives you a month to get your shit together. Our guys are somewhat healthy. And if that we can contain and kind of limit Justin Fields, I got to get out there and say, what, we're beating the Bears in Week 5. So, to me, we're going to be 3-2 after Week 5. I see what Paul says. He gives me the loss just because of mobile quarterbacks. And like I said, I think that's my biggest fear is the mobile quarterback issue. But I think we sneaked that one out, and it might be one of our few victories for the season. Kind of looking ahead. Week 6, we got Atlanta Falcons. Barring injury, this won't be a revenge game for Taylor Heineke. Why? Because Taylor Heineke was signed to a multi-million-dollar deal to the Atlanta Falcons to be the backup quarterback for Desmond Ridder, the 2022 third-round pick out of Cincinnati. But the Falcons' avant-garde run-first offense minimizes the quarterback and highlights an elite trio of rushers. Right? They got Patterson, they got Algier, and Bijan Robinson, the first round running back pick out of University of Texas. So pretty stout offensive set of skilled players for Atlanta, right? And depending on what happens with Ritter's another mobile quarterback, but not predominantly mobile, right? Kind of clear as mud. So will be interesting. But their defense should be competitive, led by Grady Jarrett and the new safety Jesse Bates, who they signed in the offseason. But, I got to think, even though we're going into Atlanta, into the Mercedes-Benz Stadium Dome down there, that, Washington comes away with a W against Atlanta. Unless Atlanta surprises me somehow, shape, or form by that offensive trio, I just think our defense is going to be able to focus on maybe not even all three of those guys, but two out of three of those guys to kind of take them out of the picture and put the predominant workload on another workhorse. By then, it's week 6. The offense is hopefully rolling. Wide receivers are all back. Tight ends are in sync. And, we're rolling. So what am I calling that? I'm calling that a two-game win streak as we go from the Bears into Atlanta Falcons, right? But then, oh, my, week 7. We're on the road again, right? That, we're going over to MetLife Stadium, not a far trip up I-95. We're skipping Philly on the way up. And we go to MetLife Stadium, and we're playing at the New York Giants. The New York Giants just seem to be this thorn in our side every year, right? And if it ain't the Giants, it's the referees doing the Giants game. So the last time the Commanders played the Giants on the road, their game finished in the 2020 tie last season, that one and only tie from 2022. This year, the Giants doubled down on quarterback Daniel Jones, and are trying to prove their surprise surge to the divisional round of the playoffs was no fluke. So, of course, we know Coach Dable remains one of the biggest, brightest offensive minds in the league, and is complemented by an aggressive defensive coordinator, Wink Martingale, right? So, of course, we know that the Giants went out. They extended Danny Jones's contract. They picked up the what was I gonna say? They went up and got Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders. Picked up a bunch of other guys in the offseason. They picked up some Lime help and Sean Harlow and Donovan. They got nose tackle Donovan Jeter, offensive tackle Davenport, defensive lineman Atkinson. They re-signed Saquon Barkley to the, after that franchise tag negotiation debacle. So they're bringing back a decent amount of star guys, right? So it's going to be interesting to see what the Giants do with us. You might not think of him as mobile, but Daniel Jones, basically let's call it as a mobile quarterback. I think next to Saquon Barkley, he was second in team rushing last year behind Barkley. So, being at MetLife, man, I don't see it happening. And I got to go with the loss, to the New York Giants that week. As I said, in my predictions, season forecast, I kind of think that I'd like to think that we split divisional games. And, a lot of times those away games are a lot harder in the NFC East division than the home games. And I think this away game to the Giants is going to be just that. It's going to be a loss to the New York Giants on October 22nd, Sunday afternoon game, 1 p.m. on CBS. But then, don't you know it, week 8, we turn around and the Philadelphia Eagles are traveling down the I-95 corridor, and they're coming to play in FedEx Field. So potentially a major milestone for Washington's new ownership group, right? Basically have the Josh Harris ownership group who owns basically the majority of their teams are in the Philadelphia, New Jersey era, and now the the Philadelphia Eagles are coming down to play in DC. If the season is going well and attendance is strong by week 8, which I believe it will be, even if the record is like 500-ish, you're going to see another sold out game. Eagles faithful are going to be at FedEx Field. Commanders faithful are going to be at FedEx Field, but it's not going to be the overpowering number of fans that we've routinely seen in years past. Last year, Giants, Cowboys, and Eagles, predominantly the other team's fans were at that game. I don't see that happening this year because of the new ownership group. And at least if we can have some kind of a decent record, even if it's 500 going into this game in week 8. So this could be a statement return for the Commanders fans at FedEx Field after years of the Eagles fans flooding into our seats to create what they call the Lincoln South, right? So if the season isn't going well and the birds are soaring, could be just another Sunday. But I kind of feel that in my gut, we're going to win this game. I don't know why, but I just feel that, we have the potential to beat the Eagles once. We don't have the potential to beat them twice. I don't think we're going to lose to them twice. If this was the first matchup of the season with us playing them at home, I might chalk it up to a loss. But being that this is our second time that we're going to see them this season already, I think, we're going to have the film. We're going to know what we did in the first appearance against them, even though it was at Lincoln Financial. So I'm going to be optimistic, going to cross my fingers and say we're going to pick up the dub in week 8. However, this one very easily could be going the other way against, the Philadelphia Eagles. So, but let's be optimistic and be a true fan and be like, hey, look, we're going to split the series. We're going to call it 1-1 against the Eagles this year. We're going to get the W. Week 9, New England Patriots, November 5th, 1 p.m., Fox Sports. The most interesting storyline of this game is how, as I said earlier, basically between the offensive coordinator and Bill O'Brien and their quarterback, as well as how Coach Bill Belichick, the defensive genius of the New England Patriots, crashed his defense to go against basically, let's call it rookie Sam Howell at quarterback. Bill Belichick is amazing at being able to scheme, throw adjustments, throw disguises at rookie, let's call Sam Howell what he is, a rookie quarterback, against rookie quarterbacks in that attack and to see how they respond, right? You can assimilate Bill Belichick and his defensive scheming to Rembrandt, the famous painter, right? As he attacks Sam Howell and crafts those great defensive game plans. Young passers have always struggled against the Patriots and Bill Belichick, and the Patriots defense should be one of the best in the league, hopefully. Top 10-ish probably, with a strong deep rotation of safeties, linebackers, and their secondary, even though they lost Gilmore. So New England should also be better on offense now that Mac Jones is paired up with Bill O'Brien and they scrapped that experiment of Matt Patricia and Joe Judge as offensive coordinators. So I got to say, hey, look, we're a little bit more well-oiled machine going into week 9 against the Patriots, and I'm going to say we're going to win. It's probably not going to be a lot. It might be a lot closer than I think it is, and even the sports betting people think it is. But, we'll see what happens. So, we'll give them the W on that one. Week 10, we got to fly West Coast, get the jet lag going, and November 12th, we play at the Seattle Seahawks, 4:25 afternoon game on Fox. So this is the second game in the toughest 4-week stretch of the season for the Washington Commanders. In November, the Commanders have 2 road games against tough teams, right? So one of which is a 6-hour flight, and then 2 divisional games, Eagles and the Giants, and then the second one on the road in a short week. So by going back out to Seattle. So Pete Carroll is always tough to play against and his coach teams. And then we bring back a rejuvenated Geno Smith, who played quarterback at West Virginia, to lead the Seahawks, right? So the defense includes cornerback Devin Witherspoon, who the Commanders liked in the draft and are actually close to drafting before he was selected 5th by the Seattle Seahawks in the 2023 draft. So Seattle was really good last year under Geno Smith. They actually signed him to a long-term contract extension and paying him big bucks to reflect that season that he had. So the question is going to be, is Geno Smith going to be just as good as he was in 2022? I'd like to think that he is, and I like to think that answer is yes. The bigger problem, as we alluded to it earlier, and you kind of see it as a reoccurring theme, Geno Smith is a mobile quarterback. If Geno Smith can't pass the ball, Geno Smith is just like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, all these Jalen Hurts, Danny Dimes, he's a mobile quarterback. He likes to use his feet, and that could be a problem for us in DC. So then the question is, well, how does that affect us? So being that next to Arizona, I think Seattle is probably one of the hardest stadiums to play an away game at. Kind of that 12th man, as they call it out there on the West Coast. And between the jet lag and the loud stadium and Geno Smith, I just don't see us being able to pull out the victory. So I think it's going to be another loss. So then we fly back all the way to FedEx Field on week 11. November 19th, we get our second shot of the year against the New York Giants, 1 p.m. on Fox. And, knowing that this is the second game of the season against the Giants, look, let's skip all the hype, the drama and everything else. It's at FedEx. The fans are still pumped. It's the week before Thanksgiving, before we stuff ourselves full of turkey. The Commanders are going to beat the Giants on November 19th. So, it goes back to, hey, we're splitting the series with all of our divisional opponents. That's the goal this year, to at least get out of the division at 3-3. Let's kick the narrative out of the way, and the Commanders are going to beat the Giants on November 19th. Which then leads us to November 23rd, week 12, 4:30 p.m. on CBS. We play the Dallas Cowboys, right? Oh, man, one of the greatest games that we look forward to every year. Probably one of the biggest rivalry games for the Washington Commanders, year in, year out. And we go to Jerry's World on November 23rd, which, by the way, I've been there once. Pretty awesome experience. Awesome game. I was there on Monday night. We actually went in and beat the Cowboys. I won't rub that in too bad. Probably the only time that we ever went in on prime time and beat the Cowboys. But the last time the Cowboys played on Thanksgiving at Jerry World in 2020, the Washington earned the most lopsided win of Rivera's tenure with a 41-16 thumping that included running back Antonio Gibson waving goodbye to a defender on the way to the end zone in one of his 3 touchdowns. However, we got wild cards in this game, right? Not just for DC and the Commanders, but for the Cowboys. So going into the season, what's Dak Prescott going to bring to the table, right? We don't know. Dak is Dak every year. Could be good, could be bad. One of the things that's going to be probably the bigger question mark is now that Kellen Moore is gone as offensive coordinator, head coach Mike McCarthy is going to be doing the call plays. So how's that going to go throughout the season? For Dak in the offense. They lost their starting tight end in Dalton Schultz, who went to the Houston Texans. They didn't re-sign Ezekiel Elliott, who ended up signing with the New England Patriots. They gave all their money and their wad of cash to running back Tony Pollard, who's recovering from injury but had a stellar 2022 season. They did pick up some good defensive help in Stephen Gilmore from the Patriots as well. So, but you know what? Jerry World is a hard place to play, and especially on Thanksgiving. Man, as much as I hate to admit it, I think we're going to be thinking too much about turkey and mashed potatoes, and, we're getting the Week 12 loss against the Dallas Cowboys. Man, as much as I want that victory on Thanksgiving Day, I just don't see it happening. I think it's going to be closer than 34-23, as Paul says, but I just don't think we're going to be able to pull it out. Week 13, December 3rd, against the Miami Dolphins, home, FedEx Field, 1 p.m. on Fox. So here's another one of those AFC East divisional opponents that we got to play in that stacked division. The team, like the animal it reps, is flashy and fast, right? Between Tua at quarterback, Tyreek Hill at wide receiver, Waddle at wide receiver, and, Miami coach Mike McDonald orchestrates that high-octane offense led by Tua and the elite receivers that I just mentioned. In the offseason, the Dolphins also landed defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, who used to coach for the Denver Broncos back in the day, who was the most in-demand coach on the market this past offseason. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does with that defense down there in South Beach. Star cornerback Jalen Ramsey went down earlier in camp, but he should be back by then, week 13 against us. Now, it is at FedEx Field. What's our defense going to look like that, coming in that late in the season? The bigger question is, we have not had our bye week yet. So we are playing 13 solid weeks of football. And unfortunately, I think on a good level playing day, team against team, we match up with Miami really well, but they're just too speedy for us. I think we're going to have a hard time with their wide receivers and their tight ends. And especially, if our linebacking group doesn't get to the point where it needs to be by this point in the season, in week 13, it just spells a big loss. And unfortunately, I think week 13 against the Dolphins is going to be a loss. It's going to be hard. Week 14, as Paul says, hey, we get the W. That's our bye week. It's kind of interesting, as I was talking to somebody earlier today, that traditionally Washington has always gotten one of the first 3 bye weeks really early in the season, right? 6, 7, and 8, something like that. Year after year. And then this year, all of a sudden, bam, we go all the way to the opposite end of the season and we get week 14. So, can we just get like that week 10, week 11 bye somewhere in there for a season? Is that too much to ask? I don't think so. It'd be great, right? So week 15, coming off the bye week, getting that rest period, we're flying out to the West Coast again to play in SoFi Stadium with the Los Angeles Rams. Question is going to be head coach Sean McVay, 4:05 p.m. game on CBS. Though the Rams still have stars left from their Super Bowl win, which I think is only like 3 guys: Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Aaron Donald. The team is paying the price for going all in during that Super Bowl year. Basically, all the picks that we, have for winning that Super Bowl, they basically traded all their roster off. And, they started to tear down that roster in the offseason. They traded Ramsey and, they've traded a bunch of other guys. So, but Sean McVay is still the coach. He's still one of those intriguing, great young offensive minds, right? So, but he considered leaving in the offseason to go do NFL broadcasting on TV. So how much is he really into this season? That'll be interesting to see. Recently enough, it's kind of interesting that for those of you that follow NFL headlines, Matt Stafford's wife, Kelly, has a podcast. I forget what it is, Keeping Up with the Staffords or something like that, where she went on a week and a half ago, and said Matt Stafford was having a really hard time relating to the young talent and the stars on the Rams. He didn't know how to connect with them. He didn't really feel he didn't want to be known as the coach on the team. He wanted to be one of them, one of the guys. As much as it sucks, I'm hoping the week 14 bye pays off for us. We go into LA, pick up the W the day before my birthday on December 17th, and we beat the Rams. I think it's definitely doable, and it's definitely going to be a much-needed win for us to pick up that we're going to need, because we're going to need it going into the last 3 weeks of the season. Let's skip the narrative. Let's skip the drama. Week 16, man, before they stacked up in the offseason, I would have chalked this New York Jets game up to a W all day long. Week 16, December 24th, Christmas Eve, at the New York Jets. We go back to MetLife Stadium for the second time this season. It's a 1 p.m. game on CBS. We thought the Jets were kind of the Jets of the Jets, right, from last year. But then in the offseason, they go out, pick up Aaron Donald. They pick up Randall Cobb. They pick up the other wide receiver from Green Bay. They picked up a couple more guys from Green Bay. Hey, look at that. They got Dalvin Cook, who was basically released from the Minnesota Vikings. They stacked up on their defense as well. Man, I don't see it. Unless we're rolling on a heater, which, looking at the list right now, we're not. I don't see us going in on basically Christmas weekend and beating the Jets. Hey, you're welcome, Eileen. The Jets are your team, and they're going to get the win on December 24th. So, as much as I believe in my team, I think Aaron Rodgers is going to be something special for them this year and how he does things. And we just don't get that win. I don't see it happening. Then we go to week 17, New Year's Eve, December 31st, at FedEx Field against San Francisco 49ers. 1 p.m. game on Fox. Interestingly enough, here we go again. We got that coaching cycle again, right? San Francisco coach Kyle Shanahan, former Washington offensive coordinator, is one of the many young, talented coaches that Washington let it get away over the past decade, along with Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, who's now in Green Bay, and a couple other guys, right? In last year's matchup, he twisted the knife by getting in the heavy personnel packages, and he just shredded us through the air, on the ground. The big questions are going to be a quarterback for San Fran, right? Can Brock Purdy basically continue the magic wand that stuck up his butt from last year into 2023, especially coming off the injury from last season that knocked him out of the NFC Championship game? And then on defense, can they keep that unit together after replacing its coordinator, who left and went to be the head coaches of Texas for the second time in 3 years? So those guys are now on, another defensive coordinator, another scheme, but they're pretty solid. Let's give them credit where credit is due. And it's the end of the season. So are the San Francisco 49ers still going to be the San Francisco 49ers that we fell in love with at the end of last season going into the playoffs? Can they keep that going and kind of go into where we are, now? Ooh, wow. Flip a coin, right? I'd like to say we're going to win, but it very well could be a loss. For argument's sake, since it's a home game, next to last game of the season, man, I would like to say we're going to win. I think we're going to have our shit together by then. We're not going to be first. We're not going to be second in the division. We're going to be fighting for that third place spot in the division, depending on how the Cowboys do and their, whether they keep their shit together or whether they have an end of season collapse. We could be going against, basically, depending on what's going to happen. Man, I got to say that 17's, going to be the W against the 49ers. So, we'll see what happens. I hope, maybe. We'll talk it up, right? Week 18, it's going to be a flex game. We all know that, right? And, they say it's going to be on Sunday. It could be on Saturday night. Could be on Saturday afternoon. Shit, they might even flex it to Thursday night. Who knows? Who cares? The Dallas Cowboys are coming to D.C. It's going to be just like last year. End of the game, even if the Cowboys are playing are already in the playoffs, which they very well could be, depending on how their season goes. Man, we're going to go in there. We're going to whoop that Cowboy ass, right? So the last week of the season, we're going to end up with a 2-game winning streak, what I believe, between the 49ers and the Cowboys. Now, unfortunately, that 2-game winning streak is not going to be enough to get us into the playoffs, I don't think. But, it's going to be interesting to see, how things unfold. So, so even depending on, how, so, I'm showing 10 games and basically 10-7, which is being generous. Easily can it go from 10-7 to 8-9, maybe even 7-10, depending on how the schedule falls, right? And how the cookie crumbles, so to speak. Like I said, I have them at 10-7, but realistically, 49ers, Cowboys game, throw in another one, and you seriously could be looking at, that 10-game season going down to 8 or even 7. The problem with that's going to be, I think in order for Rivera to keep his job, he's going to need that 9-8 or a 10-7 game or 10-7 season in order to go long term. I don't think they brought Bieniemy in by accident. Something was going on, at the end, that kind of said, hey, look, you're the head coach in waiting. It might not be 24, but it would be 25, something along those lines. There had to be some kind of backdoor negotiations and discussions to get EB in here. it's super interesting to see what's going to happen. So I'm going to say they're going to go 10-7, but man, I would not be surprised if that goes down to like 8-9, and we finish just under 500. Is it still going to be enough to get into the playoffs? It could be for how shitty the NFC is going to be this year. I mean, we almost literally snuck in last year. So that 8-9 or 9-7, you know, might even get us into that wild card. So we'll see what happens. So, but yeah, I think that's going to be our season. We'll see how things shake out. That it's going to be interesting to see how things go. So obviously next week, we'll have week 1 under our belt. We'll do a little game recap, give out some game balls, give out some gassers, kind of see what we do. Look in our preview a little bit harder for week 2 and kind of go from there. But before we go, I just want to throw up the schedule for Out of the Box Sports Entertainment. So as you can see, the Commanders Gridiron, your favorite show for the NFC East, is every Tuesday at 6:30. But we have something for everybody. Every team in NFC East is represented. We also have a show for the Las Vegas Raiders. We have college football frenzy on Wednesday nights. We have Notre Dame shows. We have wrestling shows. We have game shows. We have the Sully Squad, the Big Blue Power Hour. We have extra innings baseball. We got something for everybody. And how could I be remiss if I didn't say, hey, man, as much as I hate them, we still have them 215 boys, the Cowboy shows Wednesday nights at 9:30. So with that being said, I'm going to sign off for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And we'll see you next week. Have a good evening.